Hello and welcome to Technology Tuesday. This time we're going to be talking about how you can improve the way your Blackboard course looks. A couple of quick and easy fixes to reorganize content in your course so that students have an easier time working through the material. And the process here is going to be fairly easy to follow. Shouldn't take any longer than a couple of minutes for you to make the same changes to your courses. But what I'd like to do initially is to sort of show you a completed course, to show you how things could be. So on the left-hand side of this course, we can see that there's a slightly different navigational schema. What I've done is I've split things into three chunks. At the top we have information about the course. This is what students might see before they actively work with the content you've created. The second chunk is the content that they're working with as the course is being taught. Basically the materials where they're reading what you're providing them, the quizzes that they're taking, the assignments that you've created, discussion board, group pages, that type of thing. Then the third chunk is sort of the miscellaneous, the unnecessary but perhaps quite useful information. So to begin, the syllabus. In this particular example here, what I've done is something slightly sneaky. It's possible to create a link to an external resource. So here, after clicking on that link, we open up the syllabus as a PDF. This wouldn't be a recommendation for all courses, but this is useful in situations where you might have many courses being taught with the same syllabus, so you could link to some central resource. Not necessarily applicable to all people, but one thing to consider. Below that we have the schedule. You'll see in most classes the schedule is part of the syllabus. However, we recommend that you split these elements into two. The schedule is perhaps one of the more popular parts of a Blackboard course. It's an area where students will go in to ensure that they are meeting deadlines and they know what's ahead of them. And you can create a site with a simple table structure. So here we're seeing the various weeks, the topics that the students will encounter, and then the assignments that are due that week. And you can indicate whether there's a midterm or a final. And then the third area here is the faculty information. So a simple page that has your contact information, perhaps a link to your website, a short biography, and a photograph. So let's move over to the weekly materials. Here I have three navigational elements on the left hand side of the screen. We've got weekly materials, discussion board, and group pages. What we recommend is you try and again chunk material. A common issue with Blackboard is students feel like they're navigating through somebody's file folder or inbox. A suggested approach is to try and assemble content so it's all in one place and follows a narrative structure. Your students go into a section, everything that they need to interact with is there, and they can progress through this in a sequential order. So let me demonstrate three methods that you might choose to do this. What you can see on screen here is the content for an 11-week course. At the top we have week 0, which is the introduction and tutorial. Basically this is a way of orienting the students for the course. There are various parts of the course that they're going to need to interact with, the discussion board, assignments, quizzes, and surveys. And week 0 provides instruction on how to use this. Now most students at this point probably know their way around Blackboard, but having this introduction and tutorial is helpful for students who perhaps need a reminder. So what I've done here is I have created an embedded website, and you can see here we have a separate microsite coming up on screen, and students can navigate through this sequentially. So here there's an introductory video that they can watch. The next page will take them to information about how to edit their home page. We can see the discussion board instructions, some information about netiquette, how to download PDFs, and how to do some research. This works quite nicely. The downside to this approach is this is created in a slightly technical tool. You can create these materials in something like SoftChalk or a web editor like Dreamweaver. This is something that some people might feel a little bit uncomfortable about doing themselves. So an alternative to this is to follow the typical folder structure that Blackboard has. So here you can structure things so there is the sort of the narrative, the sequential order, but it's less enticing to look at. We can see that everything's on screen and you can jump around. It again looks a little bit less than inspiring. However, there is an alternative way that you can reorganize this content without having to learn a technical tool. And that's through a service known as a learning unit in Blackboard. And here in week 2 you can see an example of that. When we click on that, we're taken into this area here where we have this sort of sequential order, this narrative structure. Students will progress through the material in the order that you expect. So here we have some information about how to use Blogger, a PDF that you can download, a video that you can play. The next page has an assignment. We have a discussion that you can link to here. Presentation handouts and a video. And then a guest presentation. The order, the material is the same as the previous example using the folder. But by using this learning unit, we sort of push students towards following this narrative structure. If you click on Contents up here, you can jump around from item to item. And I'll be showing you a little bit later how to achieve that. Getting back to the navigational structure, we have the other items here, the discussion board and group pages. Now, the learning unit I just showed you had a link to the discussion, and this goes to the same location. So in week 2, when we spoke about internet business models, that link within the learning unit would take you here. And then the last element on the left was the external links, something of some value but perhaps less popular, less well trafficked as the course is being taught. The other thing to point out as we look at this course is on the announcements page we have a little banner image which applies some branding and orientation to the course. So how do we achieve these items? How do we get our Blackboard course to look like this? Let me jump into a fresh course and show you how you might do this. So here we have a course here. Doesn't look the same. How are we going to make those changes? Well, we jump into the control panel, and the first thing that we can do is if we go into course design and choose course banner, we can add an image, and this will be seen on the announcements page on the home page of the course. What I've done is I've put these images in a shared resource. So at DePaul on the W drive, if you go into com and then comms and then public and then online learning, you'll see a folder called Blackboard Banners that contains these images. Once you're in that area, you'll see that things are segmented according to department within the university. So I'm going to choose marketing, and I'm going to upload the image for marketing 595. I then click on submit and OK. And if I now go back to my course, going back to the announcements page, I see the banner image here. So that's done. let's change the navigational elements on the left-hand side of the screen. Again, we go back to Control Panel, and this time we click on Manage Course Menu. So I'm going to change these elements here. I'm going to rename some things, I'm going to reorganize, and I'm going to add new tools and new elements. So begin, I want to have a syllabus up here. So I'm going to modify course information to say syllabus. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to allow guest access and observer access. This means that potential students who are not enrolled in my course may be able to see this information, which I think is helpful. And then I click on Submit and OK, and back to the Manage Course menu page. So we have announcements, we have syllabus. If I modify course documents, I can turn that into my schedule. Here, I'm not going to share this with the larger audience. And again, I click on Submit and OK. Now you'll see here I have the two elements that I wanted, and the third element I was going to add is my faculty information. Faculty information is not a content area, it's actually a course tool. So this is something I'm going to have to add rather than renaming. So if I click on Add Tool link at the top of the screen, and change type to staff information, and then change the name to faculty information, I can add that to my course. So I click on Submit, I click on OK. That element has been added. It's the bottom of the list, so I want to move things up to just below schedule. So I change the number here to 4, and this has been reorganized. Now, in my other course, let's just look at that again, we have this line separating the elements. How do I achieve this? Well, the way that I can do this is through a hack. If I click on Modify next to Announcements, I can put in some basic HTML. So if I type in HR and then close brackets, which is HTML for horizontal rule, and click on Submit and OK, I've now added a bar that separates those elements. So let's add the other things that I was missing. Again, looking back at the other example, we had weekly materials, discussion board, and group pages. So external links I can modify. This is now my weekly materials. The discussion board is a tool link, so I click on that, choose discussion board, click on Submit, click on OK. I could add groups, and I can rename this. So I called it Group Pages. So I have those three elements, and I'm going to do exactly what I've done in this course here. So I'm going to want to add another bar and external links. So I click on Add Content Area. Now the code I used previously was HR. The issue I have if I type that in exactly as so is duplication. We already have an element with the same name. Blackboard won't let me do this. So if I click on Submit, I get an error message. So what I can do is use HR, a space, a /, which indicates a closing tag. So this is valid. It says the same thing as the previous HTML tag. It says a horizontal rule, but it's slightly different. So I click on Submit and OK. I have that final horizontal rule, and then I can create my last content area, which is going to be external links. So there we have it. We have the navigational elements that I wanted. I can go back to my course and we can see these in place. Now the issue I have now is I'm not entirely happy with the way this navigation looks. We have dark blue text on a light blue background. This is difficult to read. What I should do is change this. So back in Control Panel, I can go into Course Design, and if I click on Course Menu Design, I can change the color scheme. And this is where you could change things from buttons to text or text back to buttons. I have a preference for text. I think it looks a little bit cleaner and allows me to have slightly longer names for some of these elements here. So here is where I'm going to change those elements. I can pick the background color and I'm going to choose black, and then I'm going to choose white text, which is high contrast and should be hopefully easy to read. I click on Submit, I click on OK, and let's have a look at how the course is. There we go, white text on a black background. I have all those navigational elements in place. So the next thing I want to do is to populate these areas. Faculty information doesn't allow me to edit from within the screen. So if you go into this area, there's no edit button. I have to go into Control Panel and then go over here into staff information to make those changes. So I can add a profile, I can put in my title, my name, basic demographic information, and then I can upload a photograph. Now Blackboard advises that the image should be no larger than 150 by 150 pixels. Strictly speaking, this isn't true. The issue is whether the image is perfectly square. If you upload a rectangular image, you'll occasionally get distortion. So you can upload something larger than 150 by 150 and Blackboard will scale it, but make sure that this image is rectangular. Going back to the course, the other elements here, I can go in and I can click on Edit View and start to populate content here. So this is where I'd put in my syllabus. This is how I put in my schedule information, and the same thing for weekly materials. So let's start with weekly materials. In my example over here, I showed a learning unit as a way of organizing content, a way that we sort of enforce a sequential order, a narrative structure. The way that we create this is fairly straightforward. If I click on Edit View, this brings up the edit screen for this area, and over on the right hand side of the screen there are some options next to Select. If I choose Learning Unit and click on Go, I can start to put in elements. So let's imagine I put in some content here. I'm tracking number of views. Oops, actually this is not page 1, this is week 1. So let's imagine I've given this the name week 1. I put in some basic text here to explain what's taking place this week. Down here I can decide whether I want to enforce sequential viewing. I don't want this to open in a new window, and I'm going to track number of views. This now creates the learning unit, which is a wrapper. It's a place where we can put things. If I click within week 1, I can now start to assemble my elements. So let me add a couple of things. I might have an introductory video, and for that I can paste in some HTML or add text or add these elements here. and track number of views. I could add perhaps information about the course. Again, tracking number of views. Click on Submit. So here I've created two elements that are going to be within the structure. If I click on OK and then click on Display View, this shows us how the students would progress through this. When they click on week 1, they'll see what you've created as your first element. They can click on the Advance button, which takes them to the next element. They can go back. They can click on Contents to see what's within there. If you then decide that there are other things that you want to add, all you need to do is to click on Edit View, and you can add those items. And what you could do could be to create a test or a survey or discussion board that is integrated with these elements here. So over here I can click on Discussion Board, click on Go. I could create a new forum, and this is now something that is embedded within that learning unit. We can see it here. We have our first page, our second page, and then we have the discussion board. But this could be moved partway through. So again, if we look at it from a student's perspective, we have our first page, we have a link to the discussion board, and then we have our final page. It's a nice way to organize content. Highly recommended. So what are the other quick and easy things that you can do to improve the way that your Blackboard course looks? I mentioned earlier that you can link to outside resources. If we go into the Control Panel and click on Manage Course Menu, you can click on External Link, and this is where you could paste in the link to your syllabus and give it the name Syllabus. You can also make certain areas of the navigation more prominent. So let's imagine that you were worried that your students weren't reading your syllabus. If I click on Modify, I can apply some basic HTML. So if I put in the B tag around the word syllabus, this will make this element bold. So if I click on Submit and go back to my course, this is now slightly highlighted, slightly more prominent as students go through the course. My final suggestion is to ensure that your students provide feedback to you as the course is taught. So in my example course here, if I go into weekly materials for a certain element, let's choose week 4, you'll see that there's a survey. So every week I'm asking the students 6 basic questions. Shouldn't take any longer than maybe 5 or 6 minutes for them to respond. The questions are: what was the most useful thing that you learned this week? What was the least useful thing that you learned this week? Is there anything that you did not understand? Did you experience any technical difficulties? And is there anything you want to tell me? And in this particular class, I have videos, podcasts that the students can download. So I have similar questions there to work out whether these were useful to the learning experience, whether the students appreciated these being added to the course, and actually whether they watched them. So these basic questions are provided through a survey. Surveys are anonymous in Blackboard, so what I've said to the students is that they will receive a grade point for completing all the surveys, but I won't know which responses relate to a particular student. So they can answer anonymously, but I'll know whether they've completed the survey or not. And the feedback is very, very useful to me as I teach the course. It allows me to understand what things are working and which things aren't working so well, so I can make changes on the fly. Anyway, that was just a quick overview of some of the basic things that you can do to improve the way that your Blackboard course looks. I hope this is of use to you.